Coming up on FaceTime, Dr. Adams B. Bodomo has written a book titled Africans in China.
Guangzhou's African community is a vibrant trade community.
Many of the people who started this community had come in from Southeast Asia.
Guangzhou's African communities are predominantly from Nigeria, Ghana, West Africa.
Africans have developed an interesting way of communicating with the Chinese.
What are some ways that local people can embrace African culture? Right now there's a huge barrier.
This community is forging bridges.
At the beginning of the 21st century, Africa and China began to establish closer links. Africa-China relations are thus a topic of intense academic discussion, and the focus tends to lean more on China's presence in Africa. Little is known of the latter, even though an increasing number of Africans are visiting and settling in China and forming hybrid communities. Dr. Adams B. Bodomo has written a book titled Africans in China, Africa's Newest Diaspora. He's a professor of linguistics at Hong Kong University's School of Humanities. Adams came to Hong Kong in 1997, the same year as its return to the motherland.
And I don't remember the which chapter, but of course, since this is about African presence in China.
His book, Africans in China, is the first full-length study of the process of Africans traveling to China and forming communities. During the process of writing the book, he and his team of researchers conducted qualitative and quantitative research across 6 major Chinese cities, one of them Guangzhou, which has the largest African community in China, and where we meet Adams to talk about this new African diaspora in China.
You first came to Guangzhou.
You like food?
Yeah, I like food.
One of my best meals.
You came here to China in 1997. That's a pivotal year. I'd really like to hear, what was your inspiration to write this book and do the research when you first came?
I came here to get a job at the University of Hong Kong. And, as you know, we Africans, when we get to a place, one of the first places we have to know is barber's shop. So I asked this young man on campus where he goes to barber himself. So he said, well, sir, you mean to say you don't know where the United Nations is?
What was that?
And that's how they call the Chongqing mansions in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a city that would like to travel to be like New York and London. New York has a United Nations, right? London has some version of the United Nations, but Hong Kong doesn't have. So people euphemistically call the Chongqing mansions the United Nations.
Right in Kowloon.
Yeah, right in Kowloon.
Yeah,
There are lots of people there. People from all parts of the world are there. So I go to this place and I went to look for my barber. But then I also found out that it was a vibrant place, full of Africans selling, cloth and things that I'm aware of. So I felt very much at home. And I said, look, I'm going to write an article at least about this. And I started writing the article. I noticed that, well, people told me that there are even more Africans in mainland China.
So you started in Hong Kong.
Right.
And you did most of your work here in Guangzhou, right in this neighborhood.
Right.
So when was it that you came to Guangzhou and became a part of this community?
I came here in 2006, 2007, and I just came in when I heard about this, and I started doing the research. And that was a very important time. Remember, the African community began to take shape earnestly because of the Asian financial crisis. It had, many of the people who started this community or who were pioneers of this community had come in from Southeast Asia because at that time there was a financial crisis in which many of the national currencies had crashed. But Southern China was a little bit, it was relatively unscathed. So they came in here to continue with their trade.
So around the Philippines, Thailand, those currencies were threatened,
right.
but the
Indonesia,
renminbi was...
Yeah, the rupiah was gone, the Thai baht was almost gone, reducing value. But luckily, Hong Kong and Southern China were still quite stable.
So that would explain why Guangzhou's African community is such a vibrant trade community.
Yes.
So many traders.
Yeah, Guangzhou, as we all know, has always been a vibrant trade city.
Yes.
So, but the Africans just came in here and formed the largest community, the largest community in China.
It is the largest African community in China. I'd love to hear about your research process. Did you just start walking around, talking to people? You had a research team. Tell us about that.
Yes, right. When I came in, I first of all came to do what is called a pilot survey. You need to do that. When you do a major research, you do a pilot survey. So I arrived and I asked the first African I saw on the street, and he was a Ghanaian, luckily.
Okay.
And in our culture, you need to know, when you get to a place first, you look for the chief's house. I want to see the chief. So I asked him, do you have a community here? I said, yes. Who is the community chairman? Can I go and talk to him? And he showed me to go there, and that's how I developed my network. I began developing my network. You need to develop networks before you can do a research project. And so I did that. And after the pilot, and I talked to people, I came back with a team. And you need to have a multinational team, because you need to have people who speak different languages. So I came back with a team of Chinese-speaking assistants and also Africans. So that's how I began. And we did questionnaire survey. We also did a lot of qualitative surveys, talking to people one-on-one.
So the project started to grow.
It started to grow.
That's fascinating.
And that even included, what is called a focus group survey. So I brought in the leaders together, and they agreed to come together. And that was the first time they were actually meeting.
Really? For your research project?
No, not only but each of them have their national organization. What is happening is that there's no one African community in Hong Kong. We have national communities that then come together when they have to solve a problem. So because I was a guest in their midst and I asked to see them, some of them then began to meet. And that's how I put them together, and then we started.
The evidence you have in your book, Guangzhou's African communities are predominantly from Nigeria, Ghana, West Africa, Francophone, the English-speaking community.
Right.
Can you tell us some of the dynamic mix of languages and
a rich cacophony of sounds?
Yeah.
One thing I like about this community is that when you come in, you feel like you are immersed in an African city. You hear Igbo, which is the largest language spoken here. You hear Yoruba, you hear Swahili, you hear Akan, in my own country. You hear many languages, Wolof, and so you feel like you're very much at home. And besides these individual languages, you also get a lot of Francophone, French, because most of them are French speaking, with African accents. And the most important thing about language is that in terms of communication, I hope I have time to describe that.
Please.
But in terms of communication, the Africans have developed an interesting way of communicating with the Chinese. These are traders. They communicate through the medium of their calculators.
Somebody's buying, selling?
Yeah, I come in and I want to buy something. I point to the goods, and the seller pulls out a calculator, and he punches something inside and shows you. And then you look at the price and you say, no. Because Africans never buy the first price.
It's a bargaining culture.
They usually bargain. They say, no. And he also, picks up his calculator and punches it and shows the seller, who the woman may say, Bodomo or something. And then that thing continues until I've described in the book, which I call calculator communication. So it's part of the language. I want to say that it's part of the language. It is the development of pidgins, the development of contact languages.
Lingua franca.
Lingua franca, that's going on. It's going to develop later on. We're going to have an African pidgin here in future.
Over the years, have you noticed more Chinese-speaking Africans? Or more people adjusting to the language? More?
Oh yes. Africans learn fast. Usually students, the students speak more proficient than the traders who just come in from Africa.
Right.
Because the students, many of them have to study Chinese for 1 year before they even begin their program. So they can be very proficient in Chinese. But there's a problem with the trading community, Because many of them never learn Chinese. They just come in here to buy their goods and go out. So that's a big problem. But they're learning fast. You can already hear them mixing a few Chinese and English and Chinese and French and so on and so forth. As we know, the African diaspora is not a unique diaspora. There are other diaspora. It's not unique.
Right.
It's totally unique. And what has happened in the past is that students have in many parts of the world been a group of people that established diasporas have fed into. So they feed into the student populations.
Okay.
So that's what is happening here also. So we are seeing that, in fact, some of the earliest settlers in Guangzhou, I'm not saying those, besides those who moved in from Bangkok, some of the earliest settlers in Guangzhou here were from Mali, and from Guinea. These were students.
This is interesting. When were these first groups of students coming to Guangzhou?
Well, because in the Cold War, during the Cold War,
so we're back.
During the
Okay.
Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s, up to the 1990s, a lot of students came in from Africa to study in the communist countries like Iraq, from Soviet Union, and also China. And some of these students stayed back. So in fact, some of them are the earliest members of the African community, both in Yiwu and in Guangzhou here, but also even in other parts of China.
Yeah, but Zhou Enlai in 1964 was the first Chinese diplomat to visit Somalia, reestablish that African connection. Do you see the work done then in the 1960s or the 1950s to establish China-African relations? What do you see as the longevity of student communities and business communities here in China's big cities?
Well, those early efforts at contacts were very important. We wouldn't have had this if we didn't have them. So those early contacts were very important. Zhou Enlai was one of the most popular diplomats in the world around, especially in Africa. And so that was a founding stone for what is happening here now. And what do I say about the longevity? Well, as long as there's a FOCAC, there's a Forum for Africa-China
relations.
Every year, Chinese, in fact, in the last FOCAC conference, the Chinese government pledged to bring in 18,000 students over the next 3 years. So that means about 6,000 a year.
So there are a lot of Africans.
A lot of Africans coming in the university. You're going to see a lot of Africans in the university campuses. This has implications for the African diaspora.
Yeah, we have. So that's young people coming,
young people.
Having amazing experiences. What are some ways that local people can embrace African culture? And because right now there's a huge barrier. We're a bit polarized. We don't communicate as well here in Guangzhou.
Well, send out the information, and that's why I like your initiative. I like the Guangzhou TV initiative. If more media people could talk about this, because not many people in Guangzhou even know about this exciting development right in their own community. So the more people know about it, the more they can get in over there and taste African food, and the more they can collaborate with Africans. This is already happening, but it's not happening now because not many people know of this. So if this continues, I think that, and also Africans, they should enter into collaborative ventures, both in terms of business, but also in terms of cultural collaboration.
Communication,
And also, but the African community itself has a big role to play. They need to go out there and set up, cultural programs and invite Chinese to come and listen to them.
Mentioning food, I was absolutely astounded that you introduced local food to me this afternoon.
Right.
Your food from your country, Ghana, fufu, was my first time trying it. It was absolutely delicious. And it was not cooked by a Ghanaian chef. It was cooked by a Chinese chef who was hired by an African restaurant owner. That was absolutely incredible.
Fascinating.
I think
whenever I arrive in Guangzhou here, one of the first meals I take is in the Chanshu building in this restaurant. Guangzhou TV, taking me a picture.
Guangzhou TV.
Yeah. Do you like fufu?
Me, I like fufu. African food.
What's your Japan? Fufu, Banku,
Fufu, Bangu, rice, eba, samu.
Samu? Rice and beans.
Have fish, meat, chicken, abushi, alcolor, tomato sauce, pepper soup, cutting fine.
Okay. Cutting fine. Okay. What trying to fufu beef. Okay. You see, this is good. I need this documentary. Where's my water? First. You have to pack for me to take to my hotel. Okay. Great. This is fufu. One of my best meals. This is good. Wow. I'm fascinated. And at first I was skeptical about Mr. Karim's skills as a fufu maker.
Yeah, he's amazing.
But as you can see, it's just like in Ghana. He's fascinating, and so this is an example of what can happen when people get to know each other and understand each other, learn each other's cultural products, and so this is a good example of Africans coming together.
So so we're in an international city.
Exactly.
This is an international city where you can come to China and get authentic Ghanaian food.
International city, and I need to mention this. And this community is a community that is forging bridges. That's the main theme of my book. This is a community that's forging bridges. It is bringing together, bringing Africa and China, and this is a good example of what is happening. Africans are learning Chinese culture. They learn how to speak Chinese. They learn how to even eat Chinese food and even eat with chopsticks with the same dexterity. And Karim is learning how to prepare Ghanaian food. He even knows all the names of all the Ghanaian and African foods. And in West Africa, at least.
And it's important to know, not all Africans in Guangzhou are transient. Many people are settling here. Many people are marrying into Chinese families. There are a lot more multiracial children. One argument you make in your book is that with more and more multiracial children here in China, eventually these people might want permanent residence, Chinese citizenship. What do you foresee with bridge building in the future, with the African and Chinese culture merging here in Guangzhou?
Well, I foresee a minority African group here. I foresee a minority Chinese group. I foresee a group that is African Chinese, and because at some point in my project, in my work, 10% of my research population, I'm not saying now, but at some point, 10% of my Chinese population either had Chinese wives or Chinese girlfriends, and some of these already have children. So you're getting about more than 200 children at least, here. And if this continues, you're going to have this group. They will form that clear African Chinese community.
This culture needs to be recognized.
It needs to be recognized.
Yeah.
We can't just we can't just ignore it.
Absolutely.
And so it's for me when people ask me,
amen. You cannot ignore.
When people ask me about the future of the African community, I point to this community. I point to this group of people. What are we going to do with them? They are Chinese. So I want to see in future, I want to see black Africans competing for the Chinese team. I want to see Africans winning medals. I want to see Africans, supporting their country.
Yeah.
Because what is their country?
If I could just hand you your book, if you could summarize the importance of your work and your research.
Right.
You've been in China for 15 years. You're still doing incredible work. If you could summarize or give some sort of a quotation, what would say the message you would like to bring to the readers?
I wrote this book. In fact, the dedication for this book, Africans in China, is to all Africans in China. But actually, I would like to say it's to all Chinese and to all people of the world, because this is one of the first books I think the first book to actually describe this community, and I believe that this community has important ramifications. This is the first time you are seeing people from Africa meeting Chinese, in two completely different cultures in a world of globalization. So the message of my book is not just one message, but one important message is that it is a bridge building community. Diasporan communities are bridge builders in many ways. Despite all the problems we sometimes see, the confrontation we sometimes hear of and see, you're going to see that these communities are going to mediate. They are already mediating two different cultures. Not just only
conflict resolution, building bridges, as you said.
Building bridges. You're going to see this in not just only China, but in many places in the world. In India, in Brazil, in Russia, in Europe, in America, which would happen in America.
Yeah.
In everywhere in the world. So this is an important part of my book, that the diaspora communities are going to define our world more and more and more.
Fantastic.
And I hope that more work is going to be done. This is the first, but it's not going to be the last. I'm sure more younger scholars and journalists will come inside, and they're going to continue with this research.